This is FE Peer Review. The date is January the 31st, 2022. David Weiss, also known as DITRH, is wrong about the Eratosthenes experiment. Please watch this before taking him at face value. If you've been watching Dave Weiss, also known as DITRH, promote the flat earth and talking about the Eratosthenes experiment, you need to watch this because what he says about it is totally wrong. Weiss, by the way, is the owner of the Flat Earth, Sun, Moon, and Zodiac Clock app, available through Apple and Google stores. This app was recently revealed by others to contain huge security flaws, exposing app users' locations for all the world to see. You'll find a link about that in the description below. This security flaw having been brought to his attention, he has since fixed. Dave promotes this app to flat earthers at $2.99. He claims to have sold over 30,000 copies of this app, which is plenty of money in his pocket. You do the math. So he's got cash in this little game and wants you to believe in the flat earth, damn the evidence against it. So before you accept what he claims and before you give him your money, please give this a little thought. Before we go on, I just want to say I left a comment on Dave's video pointing out the basic, simple mistake in his diagram. So he knows. He probably knew in the first place. He probably knew before. We'll now go and watch a brief snippet of Dave's video.
Here's Eratosthenes. He's the sun is directly above him. There's no shadow on his stick. His buddy 500 miles away, who counted his steps to figure out it was 500 miles and somehow was able to communicate with him. At the same time, there was a shadow on his stick, and he could measure the shadow, do some math, some really good math, and figure out the circumference of the ball. The problem is sun rays don't come in parallel. On a flat earth where we claim we have a local small sun just like we see it, here's Eratosthenes, here's his buddy, here's the stick shadow. You can do the same math and figure out the sphericity of this flat plane, okay? Mm-hmm. It doesn't prove either, right?
Right.
Before we go on, there's one more assumption here that must be noted, and it's an assumption that Dave made in his presentation. I'm just following his lead on this one. Dave is assuming the sun is at one and just one specific location. All observers are looking at the same sun at its real specific location. Dave did not, and I am not, considering some highly dubious hypothesis like we each have our own personal sun that follows us around. If you want to get into that discussion, that's a completely separate topic. Here, I'm just focusing on Dave's presentation and its obvious flaws and oversights. All of the regular viewers of my channel will probably already be very familiar with the Eratosthenes experiment, so I'm not going to go into detail about it here. If you are new to my channel and are new to this subject, you will want to find out more about the Eratosthenes experiment. I've provided a diagram in the upper left along with a website which can tell you more about it, and I'll put that in the description. I'll also include another 1 or 2 videos in the description that get into more details about the Eratosthenes experiment. Here I'm just going to summarize it briefly. So what we have in this diagram are 2 images similar to the 2 images in the diagram from Dave Weiss. We'll take the one on the left. The Eratosthenes observation is based on the idea of 2 people at a specific distance apart, each observing the shadow of a stick or some similar object at the same time. So the person at the location where I'm circling my mouse, in this case, this person, the sun is at the zenith, directly over their head. And if they had something like a stick, the stick would basically cast no shadow at all. Whereas the person off to the left might see the shadow of a stick cast by the sunlight reaching that stick, and could measure that shadow. And knowing the length of that shadow, they could determine this angle. Knowing the distance between the 2 locations, they could then see where these lines converge and thereby get the distance to the sun. On the other hand, another situation is completely possible with exact same observation data. Here we've got the person on the right The yellow bit up at the top is just supposed to indicate the general direction of the sun. The sun would be very, very far away, and the light of the sun would be arriving at Earth in parallel rays, unlike on the left where we see the rays diverging. So the person at the far right, sunlight would be coming straight down. Their stick would be casting no shadow. The person where I'm circling the mouse would see a shadow cast by their stick, because their zenith angle, their straight up, is the direction of my mouse, going from the center that way. So they would see a shadow cast by that same sunlight. They could again measure the angle of that shadow, and knowing the distance between the two locations, they could determine how much of the curve they have between them, and thereby obtain the circumference of the Earth. Now that was what Eratosthenes was trying to do with his experiment, because he was assuming that the sun was far away and the sunlight was coming in parallel. However, with only two observers, it is indeed ambiguous. One could possibly have the situation on the left or the situation on the right, and with just two observers not be able to know which situation is actually occurring. Here I'm showing 7 observation points with the same two scenarios, flat and curved. We see 7 observation points on the flat surface, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 7 on the curved surface. The lengths between them are equal, and these 6 lengths between the 7 locations are the same length as these on the left. Now we've got more information and can see an important difference. Note that the two groups of angles aren't the same, this group of angles or this group of angles, even though the observers are spaced at equal distances for both. The farther we get from the sun being directly overhead, the greater the difference becomes. Let's start on the right diagram at the right edge. That observer sees the sun directly overhead. The next observer to the left sees the sun at an angle of 81 degrees above the horizon. And then the next 72, the next 62. Let's take the diagram on the left. The first observer at the right end sees it straight overhead. The second observer sees it at 81 degrees. It's the same as in the other case. I should point out that this program SketchUp rounds the text to the nearest 1 degree, so there may be a slight difference between these two angles, but it's less than 1 degree. We'll move to the third observer, 72 degrees, 72 degrees. Again, almost the same. Within a degree, they're seeing the same angle. Now we move to the fourth observer, 62 degrees, and this observer, 63. So the difference exceeds 1 degree. Fifth observer sees it at 52 degrees on the curved surface and at 56 degrees on the flat surface. So now they've diverged by 4 degrees. And then the next is 43 degrees versus 50 degrees, so we have a 7-degree divergence. The last of our 7 observers sees it at 34 degrees on the curve and at 45 degrees on the flat, so we have an 11-degree difference. So as we compare these two further and further away from the zenith observation, the difference grows larger and larger, and there's a very definite difference between the angles observed. So if we accept that we don't have some amorphous personal sun that follows each of us around, then we're left with only 2 possibilities. If we actually go outside and measure the sun angles, we will get one or the other of the following. A group of angles that converges on a relatively near sun when laid out on a flat surface, or we will get a group of angles that gives parallel lines when laid out along an arc. This is the key, and this is where Dave Weiss goes wrong. Dave implies that the angles observed in both of these diagrams could be the same set of angles, and we would not be able to know which of these situations we were in. However, when you actually look at the geometry involved, which is what we just did, we find that with our observers at the same distance apart in both cases, we end up with a different group of angles. We do not end up with the same group of angles. So if we observe this set of angles, we've got a curved surface. If we observe this set of angles, we've got a flat surface. If we observe this set of angles, we know that we do not have a curved surface, and vice versa. What if we take these supposed arc angles and lay them out on a flat line? That is, after all, what Dave Weiss is suggesting. So in this slide, I've taken these angles and I've laid them out on this flat line here. Here I've laid out the same set of angles on both a flat and curved baseline. As you can see, the angles on the flat baseline do not converge on a single point, a sun in a single fixed location. To accept this layout, we would have to violate our assumption that there's just one sun in one place and we're all looking at it. So based on that starting assumption, which is implicit in Dave's diagram and presentation, we've seen here that we can answer the question of whether the baseline is flat or curved by doing a group of observations more than just two. So here's the next question. Eratosthenes only did a two-person observation, but have other people done the same observation with larger groups? The answer is yes. I expect many have done. In fact, even school children around the world have done it. So this is how easy it is. Search online, school children do Eratosthenes Experiment, and you will find many, many examples of children around the world actually doing this same experiment themselves. It's a great thing that schools in different countries join together. Here we have an article about children in Greece and Argentina together doing an Eratosthenes experiment, gathering their data and learning how the shadows are different from one country to the other, even at the same time. Here's another article, The Times of India. School children across India coordinating to do the same experiment. This is how easy it is to do such a thing. All you need is a few people in a few different parts of the world to coordinate their activities, take some careful measurements, and you can get the data yourself. Back in 2017, 5 years ago, Sly Sparkane organized not 2, not 3, but 23 people around the world to do an observation all together. There were people on both sides of the equator and on several continents. He specifically invited flat Earth proponents as well, but none of them accepted his invitation. Sparkane made a follow-up video showing all the results. What happens if you try to lay out those actual physically observed angles on a straight baseline, and what happens if you lay them out on a curved baseline? Let's watch a bit of that video. The link to the full video is in the description below.
The flat Earth claim is that the Sun is approximately 5,000 kilometers above the surface of the Earth. This determination is because when viewing the Sun on the equinox, which is directly over the equator, from the 45-degree latitude position, the Sun is 45 degrees above the horizon. When you couple that with the distance of the observation point to the equator, you get a rough distance of 5,000 kilometers. So geometry would say that the Sun's altitude is 5,000 kilometers. Seems pretty simple. With the results of our 23 participants, let's go ahead and examine that. If the close Sun claim over a flat plane Earth were factual, then from any latitude, the shadow tests would all point directly at the Sun in close proximity to the Earth's surface, and we could determine what the actual altitude is, if they all match up. Let's first mark the latitudes of all those who perform this test. So now, if the flat Earth claim were factual, these gray angles are what we should hope to see from all those who did the test. Let's go ahead and view the measurement results from each test. As you can see, the elevation angles do not conclude a single point where one could say that the sun is located. Well, except for Joshua. His seem to hit. So Joshua, if you turn flat earther, I totally, sorta understand. So now I'll remove this target, and we'll see what this looks like if we apply all these lines to their latitude locations on a globe. So as you can see, this concludes that all angles are within less than 1 degree of perpendicular to the Earth's axis, pointing at a vastly distant sun. And if we took all the stick angles, they all point directly to the center of our big round Earth. The conclusion is pretty apparent. Earth is not a flat plane, the sun is not close, as proved here with repeatable experimentation. I would also like to note a complete lack of participation from flat earthers during this experiment. For those who seem to be seeking the truth, you sure don't want to participate in finding it. Y'all have a nice day.
Oh my god.
There are two messages here. Lots and lots of people have actually done this multi-observer Eratosthenes experiment, and their results have failed to support a flat baseline, but do indeed support a curved baseline. Second, among our notable flat Earth proponents, people like Dave Weiss, Phuket Word, and Eric Dubai, who have spoken about Eratosthenes, none of them have organized such large group observations. In fact, when invited to participate in some, such as Sparkane's, they have refused. Why? Why not do their own if they're not willing to participate with others? One more thing I'd like to mention briefly, and that is the similarity of observations of Polaris by latitude to the geometric principles at work in the Eratosthenes experiment. Replace the sun during the day with Polaris at night, and basically it's the same observation. If you consider that, then every marine navigator since ancient times who has used Polaris as a navigational aid has confirmed that the angles do not work on a flat Earth and do work on a globe. So, in summary, if you're interested in what Dave Weiss is doing and you're considering giving him your money, look into this a great deal more. What he said about the Eratosthenes experiment was completely and thoroughly wrong, as I've demonstrated here, in every respect wrong. His app was shown to have a huge security flaw, which had to be brought to his attention not once but twice, and finally publicly before he actually got around to fixing it. So if this is a person that you think you want to support, well, that's your business. But I do hope you'll look into it a little more. Thank you. Have a great day. This is FE Peer Review. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. Subscribe if you haven't. Let your friends know. Leave a comment. Love to hear from folks. If you got any questions, let me know. Have a great day. Bye-bye.